5 years of seminary and 4.5 years of priesthood, some words in the Bible still struggle with me. I did way better, though, than a 5 o'clock Mass. It's pretty bad, actually. So for today, we're going to touch upon the aspect of hopeful waiting for God, which really is Advent in a nutshell, waiting for God. And I didn't talk about that last week, so it's very good to double down on that today. You should always hear a message of waiting during the season of Advent. They specifically taught us that, actually. And given the readings that we had today specifically, we're going to ask the question, why do we need to wait for God in the first place? And we'll dabble in some Jewish history while we're at it. In fact, I'd like to begin with the Jewish component. I've actually found that, as Catholics, we have a lot in common with Jews. Sometimes, for me, it feels like we have more in common with Jews than we do with Protestants. But that's just me. So take Advent, for instance. Jews do not celebrate Advent per se. However, Jews are very familiar with the idea of hopeful waiting and waiting for God. The Jews are perpetually waiting for salvation. That's been true for their entire history. We hear directly from the Gospel of Luke, he quotes the prophet Isaiah, "All flesh will see the salvation of God." So maybe the Jews aren't as confident as us with respect to exactly what will happen next, but the Jews understand that with God, something important, something good, and something everlasting has yet to happen. Obviously, the big difference is that Jews are waiting for a Messiah who has yet to come, and we're waiting for the second coming of Christ. But if you think about it, what we're waiting for is really not that different. We profess Christ as truly the Son of God. All salvation must come through him, hence the second coming of Christ. For the Jews, they say that God and humanity still have a relationship. God is still guiding his people, and the story of salvation is still unfolding. And to all of that, we respond, yes, absolutely, all of that is true. And we profess that Christ is the center of it all, making it all possible in the first place. So, in conclusion, hopeful waiting for God, is a fundamental part of our Judeo-Christian faith. It has always been there, in one way or another, and Advent is the special time of year where we focus on that and remember that we are waiting for God on Christmas morning. Okay, we're almost there. We're almost to the question, why do we need to wait for God in the first place? There is one more thing I wanted to bring to your attention, one more related detail. I wanted to start with explaining some Jewish faith because it's very important that we respect Jews as our brothers and sisters in faith. I read last week that about 1 in 4 Europeans are anti-Semitic. That means about a quarter of Europe is prejudiced against Jews for one reason or another, and I find that so terribly offensive. It's kind of like Europe is already beginning to forget about World War II and the Holocaust and all of the lessons therein. The Jews do not deserve to be hated by a quarter of the population. That is prejudice, pure and simple. And it's wrong. And we Catholics, we should have no part of that prejudice because it's wrong. Why do we need to wait for God? It's because there is something wrong with the world. There is something wrong with the world that we cannot fix alone. You feel it, I know you do, We sense the symptoms every single day. The symptoms are global warming, war, violence, sickness, death, boring jobs, loneliness, depression. All of those are little problems that exist because the big problem exists. And yes, I meant that. Death is a little problem. The big problem, which affects everybody, is that the world is not perfectly in alignment with God. There is something off about the world. It is not as it should be. And it affects all of us. Even someone who's young and healthy and happy and has a great job and loving friends, even they will sense that there is something off about the world. And there are a lot of ways we can put that into words. There are a lot of ways we can express that the world is a little off in some way. But if we're in a hurry, we can describe that with one single word: sin. Sin exists. Original sin is a thing, and because of it, we are all doomed to be out of sync with God for as long as this world exists. There is something a little off about the world because no one is entirely free from the effects of sin. Why do we need to wait for God? Well, because his work is so obviously incomplete. For all of the problems that we can fix on our own, that problem, that core problem, will always remain. The problem of sin we cannot fix without God. It is not a modern problem. It is not a technical problem. It is a human problem, or an existential problem, if you'll allow me the philosophical term. Advent is the season that finds us reviewing our faith that God is not done with the world, and collectively, we're not done with the work that God has us here to achieve. When we wait for Christmas morning, we're waiting for the second coming of Christ. We're waiting for God to continue the story of redemption, which is still at work in the world. I just have one more thing to say, and that's how we battle sin in the first place. We fight against sin by doing the will of God. That is the opposite of sin. This bears clarification. Kindness is not the opposite of sin. Kindness is very often a good thing, don't get me wrong, but kindness can protect sin from being stamped out. If someone in your life is doing something wrong, kindly ignoring the problem does not cancel out the sin. If anything, it compounds the sin. I hope you guys haven't forgotten about the anti-abuse, anti-trafficking effort I'm hoping to get going. We're still a few weeks away from taking it to the next level. We haven't talked about it very much lately, I realize that. But guys, come on. Being kind to a human trafficker is not holiness. Standing up for what is right is far more holy than any of that. The opposite of sin is grace. And grace comes from God, not from us. That's why we still need him. So if you don't know what else to do about something, never be afraid to submit to the power of prayer, and of course, keep coming to Mass. Because after all, the Eucharist is the holiest object in the entire world. The Eucharist is the most holy thing on the entire planet. Christ is right there, ready to go for us. And you can let that grace carry you right through to Christmas morning.